Hi, everybody. I'm Liza Eintema. I am so excited today to be interviewing Rachel Moore, who is the president and CEO of the Music Center for this, our second season of Raising the Barre. Hey, Rachel.
Hi, Liza.
So we've known each other for a few years. You're one of my idols in the business because you were an early and outspoken advocate of women in dance in particular, the performing arts in general. And so I first knew you as executive director of ABT. What brought you to Los Angeles?
Well, I was at American Ballet Theater. I had been there for 11 years. It was my second tour of duty because I had been there as a dancer under Mikhail Baryshnikov's leadership. And I love ABT. I love ballet. I love dance, but I've always had sort of a side to me that was interested in how the arts intersect with community. What is our civic life as artists, sort of taking it out of just being in a proscenium-based space and seeing how the arts intersect with our community, our nation, how we can uplift the arts, because at root, I believe that the arts make people's lives better. And with that sort of framing, whether you're dancing or running a company or running a center, you're still facilitating the arts and improving people's lives. And so I wanted to, when the Music Center, which is the third largest performing arts center in the country after Lincoln Center and the Kennedy Center, we have 4 theaters, a park and a plaza. When the position became open, I was really interested because it provided me a much broader palette of ways I could interact with the community. And also, as we are, in the 21st century, what does a performing arts center of the 21st century really look like? How does it address its communities? Because when you look at these big performing arts centers, most of them were built, the big ones were built in the 60s. And what we thought of as art in the 60s is very different than what we think of now. The demographics of the country are radically different than they were then. And how can we be relevant? And further, these large institutions are frequently the biggest investment by a community in a physical asset for the arts in any city we are. And, the Music Center, we're owned by the County of Los Angeles, the land and the buildings. So as a government facility, I feel we have this moral obligation to serve everybody who lives in the county.
And good for you.
So that was, this notion of thinking much more broadly, and how do we engage in the community at this point in time where the world has changed and the arts are changing. And when we wear both an artistic hat and civic hat, what does that look like? And that was really interesting to me. And so it wasn't that I was saying no to ballet or no to dance. It was more, I wanted to leave into the civic piece, and I wanted to have a broader palette to play with.
So when I talk to anybody who is planning, who is a CEO, part of what I always ask is, what are your assets? And what are your problems/challenges? So in this case, the most obvious assets are 4 theaters, a park, and a plaza. One of the most obvious ones you face was COVID. But I'm going to ask you the same question. What are your assets at the Music Center? And what are your challenges/problems?
So let me step back. One of my greatest assets is my board. They're really terrific. And prior to my arrival at the Music Center, they made a strategic decision to try to bring the Music Center into the 21st century and to be relevant to the community of today. And to go beyond simply being a landlord, and to uplift programming, free and low-cost programming that would serve everybody. And so they hired me as the first person who is actually a professional artist to run a place that is an arts organization, not a landlord.
So not just a landlord, not just a manager, not just we need to book 364 nights a year. This is a very different mission. It's also interesting to me, thinking of my friend Alan Harrison here, it's very different than we are going to program the best. And the best usually means white and male and, big orchestras, et cetera.
Yep.
So that's quite a shift. And it was done before a number of organizations arrived at that. So now I understand why you say your board is one of your best assets.
Oh, absolutely. And they, I came in and helped articulate how and what. So we changed our vision from being, a performing arts center, blah, 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 to saying our vision is to deepen the cultural life of every resident of LA County. And what I love about this is it's very outward facing.
Yep.
And it says, the arts live everywhere. We're here to support and uplift this ecology of incredible art that happens all over. And so that notion was really freeing. And initially, I think when I came back with sort of the strategic framework around this, I was a little worried that they'd be like, oh, you're going too far.
Yep.
And they said the opposite. They said, go further.
Keep pushing it.
Keep on pushing it. And part of that is LA County is arguably the most diverse county in this country. We are 60% Latinx. And the demographics of California are about 20 years ahead of the demographics of New York. So we are on the front end of a very important shift in this country. And also, I would say, having spent many, many years on the East Coast, New York and the East Coast, still there is a sense that they're getting validation from Europe. Yep. And California has never felt that. It is
Amen. And even, dare we say it, at least in dance, the field that I'm particularly interested in, hey, New York Times, there's something outside of New York and beyond maybe the Royal Ballet, maybe La Scala. Let's take a look at the West Coast. And it feels like every 5 years, the New York Times rediscovers Los Angeles. And it's like, no, actually, there's this incredibly vibrant scene.
Yeah, we've been doing this stuff for a while.
Yeah.
And you look at the visual arts world, everybody recognizes that LA.
And there we go. And I was just going to say that. Yep.
Yeah.
So galleries, the Broad, everything else, but not so much the other. So I hear two challenges in that, or exciting possibilities. One of which is, how do we lead into the community? And the challenge is, LA looks like what other major urban areas are going to look like. And then how do we get the art to people in a way that they can afford, I would assume. And then also sort of, how do we define art? What do we want to show? What do people want to see, right?
In terms of the work that's being done, I hate, this excellence or what have you. I think that is an artificial construct.
Indeed.
I also think that the way we are going to move forward is changing our relationship with the communities we serve. It is not that we have one person who makes decisions about programming, then people come in, buy a ticket and watch it and go away.
Yeah.
I think that
is the old model.
That is the old model. And we need to build trust and partnerships all throughout our communities, because nobody who looks different or comes from a different place is going to believe until you start having thoughtful, real conversations with them, and learning. And, it's, and then doing. So, and trust takes time. And, I truly believe that, these organizations that check the box and like, oh, we're going to do diversity now. People see that trivialization a mile away.
Yep.
And for me, the audiences of any institution are simply the physical reflection of the values of that institution. So until there's real thought around what our values are and our partnerships and how we are uplifting and learning from, organizations that don't look like or came from the same sort of traditional European white background. Until that happens, the change is not going to be authentic.
Yep.
And I also feel, implicit in that is a notion of co-creation, that, we're jointly creating projects and programs together, and we're listening to one another. And once again, that takes time. And there's also the how you do it, but certainly the what. One of the privileges I have is curating the dance programming at the Music Center. And we talk about dance and dancing because we think they're both important. And so I'll talk about the performances in a minute, but we also do every Friday night over the course of the summer, something we call Dance DTLA, where each Friday night it is completely free. And we have a different dance form, and we have dance lessons and then live music. And it can be cumbia, it can be samba, it can be Bollywood, it can be disco.
I would so show up for this.
And what is extraordinary is we've been doing this now for 20 years. And we'll get 4,000 people on our plaza dancing away.
That's a party.
And people start showing up. We start the dancing about 7, but people start showing up about 3. Setting up their picnic tables, having, whole families come. We have people of all ages, all demographics, doing every different kind of dance.
And that's what I was going to ask. So it's not just like traditional, like white folks like me and you learning cumbia or something. It's maybe somebody who's
we would be the minority.
Irish dancing or something like that.
Yeah, we would be absolutely the minority. And what's been interesting is because of the longevity of this program, we've seen people come back year after year after year, and it definitely a much younger demographic. And what's so great about dance is, you don't need to know, you don't have to be expert, but what you see are the natural movers get up there and, they're at the front, and then the people who are a little nervous are in the back. But having a great time and engaging in dance meaningfully and in person. And that's just as valid as important as the dance that happens on the stage of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion.
In this somewhat fractured and anxious and unhappy time, one might argue perhaps it's even more important. I think in our notes I mentioned, I just want to, when I hear activate a space, but it is essentially what you're doing, but it's not like, I often hear about this as like somebody's discovered a new rare earth. It's like, oh, we had this idea and we're going to activate the space. And I'm thinking, well, what were you doing with it before? That being said, if you try and do that in Chicago in the middle of the wintertime, I don't know if you've ever walked across Daly Plaza. It's 40-mile-an-hour winds. It's minus 40 below. Even the Picasso sculpture is shivering, right? How do you deal with heat? These are all things I was thinking about your job. Bright sunlight. I was in Sicily and I almost collapsed, and it was in May in some of those big open piazzas, right?
So this is one of the great things about California is the summertime, we don't generally get any rain. So we can do stuff in the summer. And most of our events, like I'm describing our evening events where it is beautiful out and dry. We're very mindful of the sun. During the other parts of the year, it's beautiful during the day, but we're certainly mindful of that with the heat. But we also have these giant theaters. How do we use the spaces and places in these theaters that aren't necessarily in the main theater?
That was going to be my next question. So I pictured you with a Barnum and Bailey ringleader's hat on, without the whip, but just running all these things at once. Do you ever have all four theaters going at once?
Absolutely.
Woo!
So we'll have, 12,000 people on the campus at one time. And then for our our plaza, can hold 4,000 people. And then our park is 12 acres. And for our 4th of July and our New Year's Eve, we can have, easily 75,000 people show up.
It's a lot of porta potties.
Yes. But what's so great is, unlike Times Square, we don't allow liquor into our events for these big tentpole events. But we have stages with live music, and it's all free. And we have tons of food trucks, and people just come and hang out. And it's, kids, and the beauty of being outside with kids is they can make noise, drop their snow cone. It does not matter.
And I'm thinking also of being in Spain and, people out at 12 midnight or 1 a.m. doing a paseo, right? And they've got babies and people are just out and walking and chatting, which is a really wonderful thing. What is your working day? Is it like 5 a.m. to midnight?
I don't know. It just, you just roll with it, right? I get up early and I go as long as I can, and you show up. I think that one of the things COVID, I became much more strategic in not going to everything.
Yeah.
That it makes me really exhausted, and then I get sick. But it's not necessary. You need to be. Everybody's much more strategic about that. And what is the highest and best use of my time and my bandwidth? So I definitely think a lot about that. But, going to the shows, seeing people. And then a big part of my job is, relationships, whether it's donors or patrons or with our government officials or with our colleagues and other stakeholders. So
you have a lot of stakeholders, particularly being, publicly owned, at least in part. So many questions I want to ask you, and, it's only 30 minutes, but I'm going to shoot a bunch of them and you can pick what you want. How did you hire to pursue this vision? What has been the biggest surprise for you? Biggest joy, biggest surprise, whatever. And big difference between, I always like to talk to people about the community within which they live. And you did a little of that with Los Angeles, but what makes Los Angeles special and how the center interacts with it?
So I think that one of the biggest happy surprises that I had was, coming from an arts organization, which was very discipline specific, and the board had, these are people who care about ballet.
Right.
Or dance. My board, people, they all love the arts, but it is more about, the reason they're on my board is because they think that the arts make their community stronger. And they have this huge sense of civic obligation, and they want to ensure that other people have access. And that's a very different sensibility.
Indeed.
So that's been really tremendous. Also, when I came in, my board was 4% BIPOC. We're now 40% BIPOC.
Well, that's a big shift. And I assume that was intentional on your part, but also intentional on the board's part.
Yeah, when I came in, we put together a little task force and sort of figured out what could we do and how can we expand. And what's been so wonderful about it is the conversations have shifted, which is not surprising. If we're going to look like LA, we can't have a board that doesn't look like LA, and we need to serve LA. So
yeah, I would argue that a lot of ballet companies sort of haven't gotten that message yet, right?
It's hard. I will grant you that it's hard. But what was fantastic is now when we bring people onto the board, these extraordinary people, BIPOC board members come on and they walk into a room. They don't look like they're different than anybody else. And their shoulders go down, right? It is a completely...
That took some time to get there,
It took time, absolutely. And once again, it's the trust. And then 50% of my executive team is BIPOC. 50% of the executive committee of the board is BIPOC.
Wow, that's really important.
Because I felt, once again, the power base of a board is generally in its executive committee. And if that remains all white, then all the other is window dressing.
And if the finance committee and the strategic planning committee are all white and usually male, that's where the money, that's where the power decision making is. So those are some pretty amazing statistics, and that means a big shift. What I find, Rachel, as I dig more into this, is that very often people assume boards are a monolith and that everybody's going in the same direction at once. And that's very often not the case. And you can see when a new female artistic director or CEO comes in, or a new person of color, and it doesn't work out. And it's like, well, what went wrong? Sometimes, having sat in a number of board meetings, it's like, just because they did the big thing of hiring and setting a new direction doesn't mean there are people who are now pushing back the other way or have gotten nervous, et cetera. But it sounds like your board, and I'm thinking of a couple of other companies like Oregon Ballet Theater, really did the work and was like, yes, this is really what we do want to do.
Yeah, no, and so I interesting point of fact. The chair when I was hired was a woman, and my current chair is a woman, 2 separate women. And you have to have your chair have your back on these changes. And both of these women absolutely 100% agreed with the changes we made. And there were definitely, I would say, on the board, 70% of the board is new. And part of that is, we made a shift in terms of the composition, but also, if you're not interested in this new vision, you shouldn't be on the board. And
Yep.
so people had to make that decision for themselves. And because my board chair and I were in alignment, that was a possibility to, say, maybe this isn't the right board for you anymore. Or, how you just rotate off. So that's a really incredibly important thing to get people aligned. And also with this strategic framework, we brought it to the board, people got behind it, the staff has gotten behind it. I actually feel like, as an institution, and we're big, we have 1,400 employees, we are rowing in the same direction largely. There's always,
and that is a very large institution, a very large organization. I did ask you about staffing earlier, and I'm going to ask you again. Like,
I forget
programming, community outreach, all the things.
Who's on my staff? Well, so my
or just what roles you think are critical to, instead of we are a temple of fine art. If you don't get it, too bad, right?
So when I came in, there were some openings on my staff, but I have a CFO, marketing person, development person, a COO, because we're a big, operation.
Yeah, you are. Right.
And I hired 2 new positions. One is the executive vice president of programming, a woman of color, who is Josephine Ramirez, incredibly smart. And then I also hired the Music Center's very first SVP of People and Culture. We had 1,400 employees and no real HR function. And I'll get back to the programming in a second. Once again, if you're going to support and uplift a diverse workforce, that's strategic. That takes thought. It takes training. And, arts organizations are notorious for not investing in their people. And so we invested a great deal of time and money, both in the board and the staff, in DEI training. And we are about to launch employee resource groups, which is very unusual in the nonprofit sector. So basically, they're affinity groups within an institution. And, we've really taken a very good look at compensation, and we're looking to rationalize titles, which, in a lot of nonprofits, I can't pay you, I'll just make you, the King of France. And really trying to, I'm very proud that we pay we did an analysis of pay, got everybody up to sort of minimums, and we're working on building that up and building structures so
From
there's
there, yeah.
equity and transparency in pay, and we provide really, really good benefits. And once again, if you want to hold on to good people, you have to treat them with dignity and respect. And a piece of that is making sure that they and their families have health care.
Yep. And that's kind of what I was going after is aligning your staffing with your vision. That's
right.
Exactly what I was going after.
The programming, Josephine, there had been a lot of sort of programs that lived at the Music Center. We did our dance presenting. We have we have the largest arts education programming on the West Coast, serving 150,000 kids annually. But the programming wasn't talking to each other. It's like all these little,
Yep. And they're all amazing, but they're all
floating, right?
Yep.
So Josephine came in, and part of her job was to bring everybody together and start talking amongst one another. But also, instead of hiring a traditional artistic director, which is, this notion of a single person, and this is, the traditional version, a single person with their artistic vision and their way or the highway.
Yep.
And implicit in that is, of course, all the biases that are attached to a single person.
This is good. This is not. I decide. You're going to elevate me, and I decide what is good and what is not.
That's right. Yep. That's right. So instead, we turned it on its head and decided that all the programming needed to be funneled through a specific philosophy of programming, so that when Josephine leaves, the philosophy and the viewpoint, and it stems from deepening the cultural life of every resident of LA County. If the programming isn't actually doing that, if it isn't actually uplifting people, it is really, reflective of the people of LA County, then it's failing. And that's the choice of doing it or not doing it, not because I personally like it or because I think, and, when I think about our programming with dance, I was so delighted that last summer we brought in Dutch National Ballet to do Frida. And echoing back to the earlier part of the conversation about the demographics of LA County, that ballet sold like gangbusters. And we had people who had never been at the Music Center. We had also had visual arts people who had never really been there. But I would say 10 to 15% of the audience dressed up as Frida. The story that was being told is of this extraordinary woman, Mexican woman, artist, strong, in a really tough, time for women artists. And her, she was triumphant, even though she had terrible health issues and all that. Her art is triumphant. It's better known than Diego Rivera's, her husband.
Certainly by now it is. And she's almost become, I think, a secular icon for her suffering and her feminist vision. And let's just say it, she just weird stuff. I mean,
totally weird and very sad.
God bless, and great for her. Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Annabelle fan. Also, the costumes were just so beautiful.
Stunning. Right? But when we put together a season, we have a long-term relationship with Ailey. We're, bringing in Ballet Hispanico. We brought in the most amazing version of Pina Bausch's Rite of Spring, with all the dancers were from Africa.
Yeah, I think the Harris Theater in Chicago did that as well. Talk about raw. Wow.
And incredible. And, bringing groups like Grupo Corpo or Malpaso, uplifting these wonderful dance troupes. In addition to, we're bringing Joffrey, and it's
how do you? Because it's not like there's a dearth of great things, and we haven't. I mean, I know we're focusing on dance. We haven't even gotten to the music side, and that's a whole nother thing, because that's another part of your brain you got to activate. But I'm curious about. Or do you get interested in a company and then they tell you what they're going to bring? Do you get interested in a work? How does that happen?
Well, having been around the block
a bit, in the best way,
I know most of the companies. Basically, we have conversations about what the upcoming rep is. And then either I will go and see it, or Martin Wexler, who was at the Joyce for many, many years, who
Yes.
partners with me on this, will go
Yep.
see the piece. And, you know, the piece needs to reflect the values of the music center. And there are absolutely ballets I will not bring. I mean, I ballet, the stories. So let me step back. There's this incredible writer, Chimamanda Adichie. She's now at Harvard. And she says, the danger of a single story is not that it is untrue, but that it is incomplete.
Yep.
And the ballet canon has been telling a very small subset of stories for a very long time. And it doesn't mean that they are wrong or they are bad. This is an also and, not either or, but we need to expand what the stories that are told. And that is why Frida appealed to me. That is why we're bringing Doña Perón. That is why, you know, we brought Streetcar. Because I wanted stories about strong women, because
all
that is
great works
not.
by Annabelle. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. I hear, and you know who I'm talking about, certain male choreographers saying, well, this is just the way Greek myths are. And I'm like, I have an entire bookshelf of wonderful rereadings, from Song of Achilles to Circe to Ariadne, from the woman's perspective. Wouldn't it be much more interesting, just the way Akram Khan did with Giselle, to look at it from the woman's perspective? Like, I think it was Margaret Atwood, I'm not sure, but the Penelopiad, right? Look at it from her perspective, where she's weaving and unweaving, et cetera. It just never occurs to
and
people.
the stories of communities of color. And, you know, sort of like Dada Masilo has done a lot of that with dance. She redid her Giselle, which is also fantastic. And
it is. Yes, it is.
And so I think that, and that's what is appealing to new audiences, is not the same old stories, although they're very important and we treasure them. You know, it's stories about the communities that we're living in. And that's the piece of the demographic shifts have sort of pushed this field into an inflection point. And I will say, you know, you talked about challenges. There is absolutely a tension between the philanthropic community and equity, because it's not just the leadership that makes choices. What are the donors willing to fund?
Yeah, I was going to dance around that with you a little bit. A woman I very much respect in development in the performing arts said something, and my jaw hung open, because she said the quiet part out loud. She said, yeah, Liza, well, as we all know, performing arts philanthropy really hasn't changed in the last 40 years. And I thought, and that is why we're in a pickle right now, right there, that statement.
Not just performing arts. It's, I mean, you know, visual arts have the same issue.
I was going to say museums, the same thing.
Absolutely. And I will say the large institutions, like the big foundations, I won't name names, have also made things difficult because they no longer are willing to fund large institutions. So they've made the decision that they're only going to fund small, which exacerbates the power of the few.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be a real rethinking of philanthropy, because we have this huge generational transfer of wealth coming on, as you know, the baby boomers move on, and the next generations are not as interested in sort of traditional arts as, and so new models of philanthropy are going to be critical if the field is going to survive, because if the next generation doesn't think that what is being produced is relevant, is changing their community for the better, they're going to move on.
Yeah, I think I may have told you this a couple of years ago, but I was the only person in my philanthropy workshop cohort, which has a massive West Coast presence, that was interested at all in the performing arts. Now, for me, you know, gender equity has been a lifelong project, and ballet, just as we've discussed, is where I think I can make a change. But people sort of laughed at me and rolled their eyebrows. And it's like, well, because everybody else was focused on homelessness and climate change and, developing a new vaccine, et cetera. And you can't look at them and say you're wrong about that, right? So
I actually, well, no, they're not wrong to care about what they care about, but I would say that the Surgeon General of the United States is this extraordinary guy, and he has done most of his research on loneliness and isolation.
yep.
And the epidemic of it and the comorbidities attached to it. And it is absolutely clear, and he is the first to say, that the arts are an antidote to isolation and loneliness.
Particularly the way you all are doing it, right? I mean, 3 years old to 90 years old, 5 or 6 hours in a happy space dancing together. I mean, that's probably an endorphin shot for a month for some people,
And so I think that there's, this, the arts community did itself no favors by putting the art up on a pedestal where only the few can have it, because frankly, yeah, it is irrelevant for most people. And the arts community has not embraced. So much art happens in faith-based institutions. So much art happens, even in the military with the military bands. We have put up these silos of saying, I'm so special.
Yep.
I'm so exceptional that I'm not like you. And then people turn around, yeah, I'm not like you, and I don't like you.
And I'm not going to, and I now have resources, and I have some clout, and I'm going to take them elsewhere.
Well,
that is
and now I'm the majority of the community.
Indeed. And I mean, to your point about faith-based institutions in the military, a lot of our country feels very strongly about those things. And if we deride them or condescend to them, we've got a real problem. I mean, I'm thinking of Adam Driver's incredible work sitting in basement with vets doing Shakespearean plays as a way of processing trauma, loneliness, et cetera, everything you said. I wish we could talk all day. Really bummed we can't, because you're doing such exciting work. Give me a couple of thoughts about what prepared you for this role. If people are interested in, they can't be you, but in running this, in the best possible sense, circus, 5 different things going on, what qualities do you need and what got you here?
Well, I actually think one of my great strengths, even though when I started out my career, people didn't think it was that I was a professional artist. And I've actually worked for arts organizations that thought that was inconsequential. And I really have tried to build a career around being a bridge between the artistic community and the business community, because these institutions are businesses, but they're dealing with the arts.
Yeah.
And there's sort of skepticism, fear about that other group. And so I'm good at translating.
Yeah.
I think that, it's a generalization, but I do think that women have a different leadership style, which is much more collaborative. It is not about me. It is about the mission. And I'm here to serve the mission, whether I was a dancer or whether I was a leader. I'm here to serve a mission that I have dedicated my life to. And when I deal with my team, I want to hear everybody's opinions, because once again, it's not my decision, it's getting to the right decision. That is what is important. And so driving it away from your ego and focusing on what is your North Star, where are you trying to go? And equally importantly, why is that important? You need to articulate why it's important. So I think that, having been a professional artist at American Ballet Theater, and I also, spent some time working in the classical music world, and I learned a lot, deeply involved in sort of diversity and inclusion for long before it was, talked about in any sort of broad way. It is going back to the beginning of this conversation, I think that the arts make people's lives better. I view myself as using the arts as a tool to make people's lives better. And because of that, it's a crusade. I want to make people's lives better, and that's why I get up in the morning. It's not because of something, I want to put on a play. It's because it's critical to my community. I think it's critical to our humanity, and frankly, I think it's critical to our democracy.
I don't think we could end on a better note but that. Rachel Moore, thank you so much for the help you've given me, all the amazing work you're doing, and a very refreshing and I think important take on what the job is, right? And what performing arts can do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.